G'day, g'day. This is Chris McEwen from the Australian thrash metal band Hidden Intent here. You might remember me from episode 243. Just wanted to plug our new album Dead and Destiny. If you love a bit of old school thrash such as Sacred Reich, Slayer, Megadeth, Mortal Sin, with some ochre Aussie humour thrown in for good measure, then I kindly invite you to have a listen to Dead and Destiny on your favourite streaming service, or if physical media is your thing, then you can grab a CD, a killer 7-colour album print tee, or a limited edition blood splatter vinyl at hiddenintentofficial.com/shop. Get a dog up here, over to you, Mr. Andy Dowling.
Hey, it's the Andy Social Podcast, episode 299. And my guest on this episode is Karl Lean. Karl is the bass player from the Australian metal band Nothing Sacred. And if you're not entirely familiar with the band, they've been around since 1983. That's right, they're old guys. They've been around the traps. And if you read online, some people even say that Nothing Sacred were one of the first Australian metal bands to be playing speed metal. These guys predate bands like Mortal Sin and Hobbs Angel of Death and all these amazing thrash metal bands that came out of Australia in the 80s. There was very few bands playing this type of music back in the early 80s, and Nothing Sacred were one of those bands. And I tell you what an amazing story. You're going to hear it in this chat with Karl. Karl just shares some great stories from over the years, the ups and the downs. And now we're in 2021, and they've got a brand new album coming out on the 16th of July called No Gods. It'll be available everywhere, and depending on when you listen to this, click through into the show notes over at andysocial.net, and I'll have links to purchase the album. So if you're listening to this past the 16th of July, 2021, then I'll have all the links in there, but I'll eventually update them anyway. In the meantime, you can check out their 2 singles that they've put out this year called Death Wish and Final Crime. I'll have links in the show notes, and everything else that we discuss. Just a great guy, an amazing story, and I tell you what, if you're not at the very least intrigued or slightly excited to hear No Gods when it comes out in July after listening to this chat with Karl, then I don't know. I think this is what makes metal and music just so much fun to listen to when you hear the storylines, you hear the narratives around how bands get to where they are, and it just, anyway, you'll hear it in this chat. So enough crapping on from me. Please enjoy this great chat with Karl Lean. What were you guys listening to back in the early 80s that gave you like the motivation or even the influence to start playing metal? Because, you know, obviously there would have been some records out and some things here and there, but it's not easy just to go and pick up music at the time. So what were you guys listening to that got you started?
It's really interesting actually, because I'm one of these effects you have when you feel a bit old, but I look back and I can remember being like 16, 17 and feeling like I'd missed out. Like the golden era of music had already passed me by. That's because Ozzy had left Sabbath, Blackmore had left Purple, and I was sitting there thinking, I'll never get to see these bands in their heydays now because, you know, they're already splintering, they're falling apart. It's the late 70s and the heydays are over. So, you know, my youth was full of this disappointment that, you know, these great bands that I got into those bands when I was probably 12 or 13 and, you know, buy an album. I used to live in a country town, so I used to have to like order the album in. I'd somehow read a Duke magazine or Ram magazine or the overseas magazines, Cream and Circus and stuff, and you'd find out that there was a new release from somebody. So you'd go down to the store and order it, and then you'd wait 6 weeks for it to come in. And then you go down and pick it up. So I used to buy my records and stuff like that. Sometimes I'd travel to Melbourne and, you know, on a weekend and go hunting in the record stores, but it felt like I'd already missed a lot. So I started from that position where I was already feeling like the good times had passed me by, you know. So I really liked punk. When punk arrived, I really enjoyed that. And then sort of that meld of the two was pretty much Motorhead. So somewhere around 79, I discovered Overkill. I think somebody played Overkill to me. So I went out the next day and bought like everything, everything I could that had the word Motorhead on it, which wasn't a lot back then. But then, that was quickly followed by, Bomber and then Ace of Spades and then the live album. So there was a rush. That was back in the days when bands used to do at least an album a year, So there was a rush of stuff, and I got into that, and that just led straight into, the whole new album thing, Iron Maiden, and all that stuff. And then I realised, in fact, I hadn't missed out at all. There was plenty of good stuff coming along. So I, born and raised in a country town, but was desperate to get out of there as soon as I could. So I headed straight to the city as soon as I could, as soon as I was old enough, about 19, I think. I just headed down, and totally with the intention. I told my parents I was going to uni, but the intention was completely to join a band. Everything else was just a disguise or something to keep Centrelink off my back. But
love it.
Yeah, it was purely about trying to get into bands, and it didn't take long before I met Sham, our drummer, and he's got a similar background. He's a quirky dude. He's got all kinds of weird interests. He's always loved all kinds of stuff, but he was really into punk, really into Motorhead. So we had a lot of common ground as well. And so he was already in a band with another guitarist. So they lost their bass player. I joined with them, and that became the nucleus that got us going, really. That was 81 or something like that. But yeah, it was New Album was what we were listening to really back then.
Yeah. What, like when you're still in sort of the country, I can just imagine, like, even just me growing up, years down the track, and I lived in a bunch of country towns up in Queensland, and, it's everything's restricted. You don't get access to as many things, and as far as finding people with common interests is really difficult. Did you have like other mates like in town that sort of kind of listened to the same sort of music that you listened to? Were there other metal fans or rock fans that you could sort of identify with, or was it really Melbourne, and that was the motivation just to try and escape and get to Melbourne where more of these people would be?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I formed a high school band. But that was, our common ground there was that, we sort of, it was more the Oz rock. I mean, we all liked sort of the Angels or AC/DC or, Rose Tattoo. So that was enough. It was enough metal punk-ish, to get me interested, and my more extreme things didn't turn the others off who were, there's some guys there, a couple of big Status Quo fans and stuff like that. So there was enough of a melting pot meeting ground that we were able to form a band and play some stuff, mostly covers. And, we used to do things like, the idea of promoters and stuff didn't exist back then. We'd rent a hall ourselves, pay $25 or something to rent a hall for the night. And I remember one gig we did that we rented the hall, we set up, we started playing. There was no one in the hall except us. And then about 3 songs in, some old dude, old meaning he was probably 30, he poked his head in the door with his dog. He was taking his dog for a walk, and he just like stopped and looked in the door, and he like waited for one song and then walked off. And that was pretty much the crowd for the night. So, I had a band and we played, but there was no one listening to us, no one interested in anything we were doing. So it was pretty obvious to me that there was no future here. I had to get out of this place as soon as I could. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely a common story when I hear like a lot of other people that sort of, especially when you're still out in these towns, in these smaller areas, when you hit your teens, and I think that's when you really start to try and work out your identity and the things that you like and what you gravitate towards, and then you suddenly come to this sort of realization where you go, oh shit, like the things that I actually really like no one else likes it. And you start to feel isolated, and it's like, well, that's why all people pick up their bags and just go to the big smoke, air quotes. And, but like when you're a kid, obviously your interests are far more general and open. And so you just sort of go with the flow and you don't realize it. But, so many guys I know that just grew up in these country towns and just eventually just went, I've got to get out of here. I've got to move on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I remember, was it year 10 or year 11 when I was at high school, about 77, I think it was, 1977. Thin Lizzy were playing, they're touring Australia. It's the one where they did that gig at the Opera House in Sydney. and they were playing at Melbourne at a free concert, a Rocktober open air concert at the park in Melbourne. And me and another guy, there was this other guy that used to be into a lot of the same stuff as me, and we both really wanted to go. So it was a 5-hour train trip from where we were down to the city.
Wow.
So we took the day off school. we didn't kind of tell too many people, but we took the day off, and instead of going to school, we left at 7 a.m. or something, went down to the train station. We caught the train down, went to the park, and found out you needed a ticket. Even though it was free, you needed a ticket to get into the seating area. Right. Otherwise, you had to stand up the back at the grass, which is fine. And we were thinking, what the hell are we going to do? And then somebody just walked past and said, does anybody need tickets? Just gave us 2 free tickets. So we were right down the front. We were about third row, went right down the front of the Maya Music Bowl and saw Thin Lizzy in 77. So things like that just reinforced to me that the city is where I had to be.
Oh, man. Talk about like a defining, like, no doubt, a defining moment in your life to be able to be in the big smoke in the city. And so that's always, I guess, and I'm just thinking of my sort of experiences as a kid going into town. It's sort of exciting, and there's all the senses are being sort of tickled as far as, sights and sounds and smells and all that sort of stuff. And then on top of that, being right up the front and getting to see one of the most iconic bands and musicians of all time. I mean, it was good. They were good. I actually have a cassette recording of that. I smuggled, the old Ghetto Blaster type thing. Yeah. I smuggled one of them in my backpack into the thing, and I just stuck it under the seat and hit record when they started playing. So I still have a cassette recording of Thin Lizzy playing at the Maya Music Bowl in 1977. Did it come out?
I haven't
right?
listened to it for. It was okay. It was underneath the seat, and there's a lot of people around singing along, so you're getting a lot more audience than you are band, really. But, but it's all right. It's still there.
Oh, that's a piece of history right there. Yeah, take care of that one. You might have to. You might have already done it, but you might have to digitize that one and chuck it somewhere. Yeah,
I've been planning to, but I don't have a cassette player at the moment. I don't have access to one, so I'm going to have to figure that one out. You're right. I need to get that transferred before time destroys it completely.
Yeah. Oh, it's a bit like that these days as well. With I sort of look around the room I'm in now, and I think I've got a tiny little cassette dictaphone thing that I still got from many years ago. But apart from that, I've got nothing that plays cassettes anymore, and I just think about cars these days. Cars don't even have CD players anymore. It's just the world's changing.
Yep, absolutely. Nothing stays still.
So, okay, so just fast forwarding a little bit. Obviously, you guys, you kick off, a band. You're in Melbourne, and you're sort of, getting, I guess, sort of just working out sort of what it takes to sort of get around town and play shows and all this sort of stuff. But I noticed that one of the first things you guys put out was a live demo. How hard was it to put something like that together and actually get it out there? And I mean, did you guys just do 20 or 30 copies amongst mates or things like that, or did you sort of really spend some time sort of trying to get a large quantity out there into the Melbourne scene? I mean, what was that whole process like, trying to get something down and something recorded?
Yeah, that was pretty different to what it is today, for sure. The live demo and stuff, to be honest, I don't remember a lot about that stuff. I mean, back then a lot of it was so informal. I mean, we'd often tape rehearsals, or if we played gigs, we'd record it, especially the bigger gigs, like the Metal for Melbourne gigs we played, they were all recorded and stuff off the mixing desk. But again, even though they were recorded, they were just pretty much recorded in stereo, left and right channel. There was no separate mixes of instruments or anything. So there's no overdub possibilities or anything. So it was all pretty basic stuff. And often we just, Sham did a lot of that sort of stuff. He's always been really interested in, he loves to keep very social, keep in touch with a lot of people, and he had contacts and stuff, and he used to do a lot of that. So those early things like the cassettes and stuff, they would have just been done almost spur of the moment, probably. And so we would have done them on demand if somebody needed something. Just nothing organised about it, nothing structured, no plan. We weren't working to a 5-step plan, and it's just step 3 or something. We were a little bit more organised or structured when we tried to do the EP and then the album, because they were bigger events and required a lot more effort. So we did get a little bit organised for those, but a lot of the early stuff was just done almost on demand. If somebody wanted something, you'd scrape something together and send it to them.
I'm just imagining.
So, pretty simple.
Yeah, I'm just imagining like someone sitting down in the corner of the room with like a dual cassette player and just dubbing an extra copy of a cassette and chucking a couple of labels, and sending it out to someone.
Yeah, it's pretty much how it was. It's pretty much how it was for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely different. I mean, obviously it's different these days with the way music's coming out, and even just the physical stuff is becoming a little bit of a relic these days. I mean, even in our band, I mean, we're lucky we're still clinging on to physical formats and still doing reasonably okay, but we're certainly going in a direction of just purely digital, and a lot of artists are doing that. And I've got a real soft spot for just the cassette, the record, the CD, like just the physical stuff and that whole experience around it. And I also love, especially like listening to bands and understanding how they approach those first couple of like the demo or the initial EP that might have been a home job or something like that, and just understanding how they sort of scraped it together to try and get something started. Because I think a lot of bands these days are always like stressed about, and I guess it's probably different now, but they want something absolutely 100% perfect straight away out of the gates. And maybe the expectations are a bit higher these days because of the tools that we've got at our disposal. But I just think that sometimes we overthink things and we just need to get some stuff out, or just need to get started. And I think that's half the battle.
I think that's a good point. I mean, I know with us that early on we weren't, we just happened to be playing. Really, we were always very much a live band. We used to play a lot, and that's what we wanted to do, and that's probably what we were best at. And then as we started writing more and more songs, and then just the environment we're in, the move to decide to go to the EP is when we sort of ramped it all up, and we decided to try and do it as well as we could. So we actually paid a fair. It was all paid off our own money. There was no involvement from anyone else. So the band just all forked threw in their dough. But 1984 or 1985, I think we paid about $9,000 to do the recording. Yeah, for us at the time, that was big bucks. It was a lot of money. I think my first car cost me about $700 or something. So it was a fair amount of money. But we wanted to do that thing. But I think your point's right. There's a line there between if you don't put any effort in, it's going to sound like crap. But then you can get too obsessed with, it's got to be perfect. And there's probably a place for that, but I don't know if it's your first recording you need to stress so much about it. As long as you can hit some kind of middle ground, an acceptable level where you clearly, you're at least in tune and you're playing at the same pace and everything. I mean, if you can meet certain basics, I don't think you have to obsess that your initial things have to be perfect. You're right. Nowadays, it's so easy to sit here and just do another take, do another overdub, just try again and again. And I sometimes wonder how you know when to stop.
Yeah.
Because we had to stop back then because the money ran out. I mean, you couldn't record at home. You're in a studio. It's costing us hundreds or whatever a day. You got no choice to stop at some point because the money's just not going to last.
That's it. So just live with whatever ends up going down on tape.
Do what you can, but you're going to have to face the inevitable stopping point. But it's kind of not so true anymore. If you want to, you can spend I think that's part of why it takes bands 5 years to do an album now.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because that's, I mean, you said before, like, a lot of bands sort of around that time were traditionally sort of releasing albums, every year. I mean, there's even some real classic bands who, they had a point in their era, like their career, where they put like 2 albums out within 12 months, and both obviously classic albums. I think Priest did that, and there's a couple of other bands, but just so foreign compared to what it is now. And as you were saying that before, I was just thinking, like, it's so much easier these days to get, like, it's not hard. You don't have to go into the studio. You don't have to go and do all these things. It's a different type of world. And if anything, it should be quicker to be able to get music out. So you should be able to put out an album every year without any issue. But I think you nailed it. I think it's just having too many options and a level of perfection where you don't really know when to just close the door and just say, we're done. And that's why people spend a lot of time, and everyone's trying to do something different as well. They want to sort of be cutting edge, and I think you just, I don't know, probably just send people crazy.
Yeah, look, I get the pressure too. That, you know, I mean, there's the quality out there nowadays. I mean, the quality of people they're playing and the quality of what they can produce. I mean, it's pretty daunting. You don't want to come out and produce something that's terrible. You know, you're gonna pale pretty quickly. So there is a bar that you feel you've got to reach for. You know, the bar is pretty high nowadays. But yeah, there is that point at which I think people just you just need to get something out, you know, just, you know, I mean, I shouldn't say that because, you know, we're probably jumping ahead here, but, you know, with the new stuff that we've been doing recently, I mean, it's taken us way longer to get it done than we thought it would, but we've had some external factors that have interfered with that as well. But still, yeah, it is amazing how in an environment where it should go much faster, it somehow seems to take longer.
That's it.
You know,
I think I think people are just very different these days. I think there's just lots of things going on, and I think we're all pulled in different directions, and there's probably more distractions than ever before as well. So I think we all, I think, probably commit to way too many things, and so that just slows everything down. It's definitely different these days. But one thing you said before about you know, playing a lot, and that was a big thing for the band. You know, I've spoken to a bunch of guys sort of, you know, playing sort of in the 80s and the early 90s in Melbourne or Sydney or wherever around the country, and just sort of reminiscing about what it was like to play back then compared to, you know, in more recent years. I'll just excuse the last 12 months of what's been going on in the world. But, you know, I guess sort of thinking about that demo, I think, you know, if you're playing so much and you're getting out there, then, you know, a live demo recording, you know, is almost like a little souvenir, a little take home, because, you know, you're already proving yourself on stage. Like people are getting the true experience. And I guess the demo is just a way of just sort of saying, well, you can take a little bit of this home, rather than it being sort of, you know, this perfect studio recording. It's something just to get the whole machine moving, and obviously, you know, being the cornerstone, being that live performance.
Yeah. I think it's one of the things, you know, you're always a lot smarter in hindsight. It's one of the things we probably didn't do enough of back then. We were pretty slow to really embrace, I don't say the business side necessarily, but that the parts of being in a band and all the rest that don't involve just playing music for an hour. We didn't necessarily jump on a lot of that. I think we were just young and just keen to play, and I think probably naive in thinking that a lot of that stuff would take care of itself. You know, that feeling that if you played well and all the rest of it, everything else would just kind of somehow fall into place, which maybe it does for some people, but I think for a hell of a lot of other people, you've actually got to think about it and put in place processes that will lead you to where you want to end up. And I think we were pretty slack about that stuff. One thing we were probably good at, though, we did do a lot of T-shirts back then. We were always putting out, Sham always had a bit of the artist in him, so he was always knocking out designs. So, you know, we got a good stable over the years of shirts that we ended up printing and just selling at gigs and stuff. So we probably did that okay. But yeah, the thought about getting organised with tapes or distributing tapes more, I think we're pretty slow about that, to be honest. It probably was one of our weaknesses.
What was it like sort of playing around that time, and was it mainly just in Melbourne and just doing a circuit around Melbourne and just playing all these different clubs and halls and places like that, or were you guys getting out a little bit further and playing some other areas around the country?
Yeah, look, it was mostly Melbourne. I mean, and this is the days before pokies arrived. So, you know, Melbourne, Sydney always had the RSLs and the pokies and all that sort of structure, and Melbourne didn't have that. So music and pubs kind of went together really well. It's the only way pubs could stay open and feed beer into people until the early hours of the morning, was to put bands on. So there were plenty of places to play. I mean, I don't even know how many pubs we played in over the years. In Melbourne alone, it's probably 30 or 40. There's a lot of different venues we played at, and they were all pretty good. Some of them not so good. But we played a lot in Melbourne. did the Metal for Melbourne gigs, obviously, but we also went to Adelaide a couple of times. We did a couple of trips to Sydney and stuff like that. We never made it to Brisbane. There were plans to get to Brisbane, it just didn't happen. It was just that little bit too far, and the motivation just never met expectation. We just never made it there. But yeah, Sydney was good. We did 2 or 3 tours of Sydney. Normally come up and play about 3 gigs. Do a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, or a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, something like that, and then circle back down. So they were always good times. They were really good crowds. Back then, even before the ability of the internet to spread the word, somehow when we went to Sydney, we had people turning up. So it was spreading somehow. Yeah.
Were there particular bands that you were sort of more regularly playing with, like even just in Melbourne or even just going up to Sydney? Were there bands that sort of either fit you guys well as far as sort of like-minded or similar styles of music, or just bands that you just were playing shows on the regular with?
Look, we pretty much played with anybody. We weren't particularly fussed, and that was one of the good things back then too. Is that, I mean, there's nothing wrong with doing a thrash metal night or a reggae metal or something. You can have a theme night. There's nothing wrong with that. But in the 80s, it tended to be a bit more of a blend. I mean, you'd have 4 or 5 bands on for the night sometimes. And often it was only 3, I guess, but they'd often cover a wide range. The first band would be more of a Aussie pub rock band. The second one's a sort of a Sabbath stoner band or something, and then it'd be us or something, and it was good. No one was particularly fussed, and nobody kind of booed the other bands off the stage or anything. So we tended to play with anybody. We weren't particularly fussed. We played a fair bit with Iron Drive in the early days. The last tour of Sydney was one of those things. It's how all these things work. It sets a chain of events in motion. We ended up playing with Tyrus, which is Pete Hobbs's band. So that was really good too, because I think us and Tyrus were a good pairing. It was a really good. Those 3 gigs were great. They were a lot of fun. It was only a 3-gig tour, but it was good.
I think I'll definitely ask you about a little bit of Pete Hobbs in a moment as well, because I'm always fascinated. I always love a good Pete Hobbs story, and I think just one of those iconic figures in Aussie music. But I think just from that EP. So when you guys got around to forking out all that money and multiple car values worth of dosh for an EP, what did that do for you guys? As far as, I mean, obviously from the sounds of it, all self-funded. You've done it on your terms to get it out there. Did you guys get like a decent reaction from putting that out in comparison to what you'd been doing leading up to the decision to record an EP? Could you actually see the results of putting it out there?
Yeah, I reckon again, it's the normal story that so happens with many bands. Shortly after the EP came out, we had a lineup change. And that always throws a spanner in the works to a degree. But yeah, that and the fact that, again, in hindsight, we didn't really market the EP very well at all. I mean, I know from my point of view, we'd been talking to a guy that used to manage a few bands. He had connections with Mushroom Records and stuff, and we were I was talking to him in the hope that, and he was talking in terms of there might, this might be worth talking about type thing. But that ended up going nowhere. That conversation just died and never eventuated. And, I think we were too passive. We didn't push it enough. I think maybe it's naivety, youth, whatever. We just kind of thought things might happen. It's out there. People will find it and they'll come to us. And although that sometimes happens, you're not doing a lot to help yourself if you just sit back and wait. And I think there was a little bit too much sitting back and waiting. So honestly, it was a missed opportunity more than anything in hindsight. I think it was a pretty strong EP. And I say that now because it's nowadays it's our biggest selling point. We get a lot of vibe from people who remember the EP and what it meant back then. It's more widespread than we might have thought, and people relate back to it. So now it tends to be a conversation starter or whatever. Whereas back then, I think it didn't do as much as we thought it would. And that's probably more on us than anything, because it was a strong EP. It still holds up pretty well for quality and what we did at the time. And I just think we dropped the ball there. And like I said, we had a lineup change just after that. Buddy, the guitarist, decided to move on. We were getting faster and faster, and Buddy was more of a classic metal guitarist. You know, he was probably more from the Randy Rhoads school. You know? He wanted to play in that kind of band, and we were evolving into something that was sort of similar to an Anthrax or a we weren't aiming for that, but that in hindsight, we were kind of in a bit of Metallica, a bit of this, bit of that. We were getting faster and thrashier, I suppose, and it just didn't work for Buddy. It wasn't where he wanted to go, which is fair enough. You know, everybody's got to do what they want to do. But just at that moment is when he decided to walk away. So, we'd done the EP and we'd started maybe trying to push it a little or do something with it, and then suddenly we were down a member. So we had that. Whatever, well, I can't even remember the details now, 6 months or so while we tried to find replacements and stuff.
Yeah, I know.
So, yeah.
There's so many sort of situations that are similar to that, where I think, and maybe it's just a case of people can kind of see the project in mind, being the release, the recording, and so in the back of their minds, they've almost got their exit strategy in place. It's like, so once this is done, like the weight's off their shoulders, and then they start to go, oh, well, I'm going to move on now. And it's probably the most critical time, because that's when you want that momentum to get out there and promote it and play the shows and all that sort of stuff. And I've seen so many bands over the years, and it's happened to us as well. Like, you release an album, and it's just starting to sort of, get some traction, and then someone decides, hey, can't do this anymore, and you're like, oh shit, okay, I need to go and find someone, quick, we need to keep this thing moving. Definitely,
absolutely. I think it was a really big thing with the EP that at the time I certainly had no problem with Buddy and his decision. I mean, he's entitled to follow his musical direction that he wants to go. So there was no issue with that. There was no personal problems. But he just wanted to go in a different direction. So that was and so it was all perfectly acceptable. But I think the combination of him moving away, it just took us off the road for a while, took us out of our groove, and we didn't do enough we were not experienced enough to really push the background and the business side. Again, use the horrible word business, but we just didn't do enough of that. And so, we wasted. That was a great moment that ended up becoming just a point, just a bullet point on the conversation rather than being a pivotal point, which is unfortunate, but such is life.
Well, I see that probably factored in with the amount of time between the EP and then the album, which I think was about 3 or so years later that came out. Was that sort of part of that? Was sort of recalibrating and getting someone else in and trying to sort of get back into a groove before going into another album? Because did you guys already have in the back of your mind that we're going to put out this EP and then, I don't know, within 12 months or within whatever, we're going to go back into the studio and start doing a full-length album? Was that sort of stuff sort of thrown up in the air because of these changes and these other things happening?
Yeah, to a degree. I also think, though, partly it was both before Buddy left and then after he left. The band direction was, like I said, we were tightening up a little bit into a. We're finding out. We've always thought that we're hard to categorize. We're certainly not a thrash band. The easiest label people throw out is thrash because we were fast and we were around at the same time as the thrash movement was taking off, and we have similarities. I can see why we overlap at times, but I've never thought that we were a thrash band. We were we were our own thing. We were a blend of different things. We had a ballad that we used to play in the set and stuff like that. So we had a range of different things that we used to do. So but we were tightening up in our direction. We were getting faster. I mean, Wooly, the other guitarist, he loved a lot of the thrash stuff, and so he was bringing riffs that were pretty fast. And like I said, Sham and I both had a punk background as well, so we would occasionally throw in stuff that was very, the little 2-minute. When we did the albums, 12 songs, the whole album only goes 30, 35 minutes or something. So, and a lot of the songs are under 3 minutes. So we were still in that zone where knocking out a 2.5-minute song was pretty common.
Yeah.
So the style was tightening up and taking shape, I suppose, and Buddy just was losing interest, I think. So there was a period before he left and then after he left when we were really kind of focused on what we were playing. So I don't think we were thinking about how to market it or how to sell it. We were just writing, and then we had George actually joined us for a short time back then. The guitarist is with us now, and then he went on to he was purely filling in. He stepped in sort of with an agreement that he was just going to help us out while we were doing some gigs or something, or whatever. And then he went on to Taramis. He was with them for years. But so we went back to, we were 4-piece for a while. We actually played some gigs just as a 4-piece with just Wooly on guitar. So we were sort of sorting things out, figuring out where we were at. People were coming and going, we're writing. But the album came out of all that, but it wasn't really part of a plan. It's not like when we started the EP, we already had the album in mind. I mean, the idea of an album would have been in our mind, but we didn't have any idea what shape it would take. And I think it was all that pivot around when Buddy left. It just gave us that ability to find that direction that we wanted to take with the album. So the album didn't really sort of become a real thing until probably after Buddy was gone. And so then we had to finish up the album and record it, and that was a bit of a disaster. So, that didn't help. We ran out of money, basically.
Oh God! And so what did that result in? Like just making shortcuts or compromises with what you were doing?
Yeah. No, look, we strangely enough, we were talking about it only a couple of weeks ago that especially for Sham and I, maybe not so much for the other guys in the band now, but for Sham and I, we actually would love to go back and re-record that album because I love virtually every song on the album. I think they were great songs written by. Back then we had a lot. Everybody was contributing to the songwriting, so there's a lot of ideas, and there's lots of different styles and feels. And the album's great from my point of view. It's great songwriting, but it's terrible recording. It's barely a demo, really. We did the whole album in 4 days.
Wow.
And that included the mixing.
Oh my God.
I think day 1 was drum tracking and bass, and day 2 was guitars, day 3 was vocals, and day 4 was mix down.
Oh my God.
and then we were done. And it shows, really. It's very patchy, very, very patchy. The performances are rough and the sound quality is even rougher. We could do a lot better than that. It's just the way it turned out. The money wasn't there.
Did you feel at the time, like once it was wrapped up and or you got the physical thing, did you sort of feel that you guys had made those compromises, or was it more sort of later on hindsight when you're looking back going, oh shit, like maybe we could have done better with the whole thing?
Oh, look, again, it's like I said, hindsight's when you're smart. Looking back, I mean, if I had more time over, we would have either not started until we had the money. We would, let's just put the recording off another 3 months and save up some more money or something, or we would have recorded another EP or something. Let's just do something we can do at quality. I mean, really, the quality was so compromised in hindsight that it's difficult to see how we could ever make something out of it. But having said that, at the time, the album quality is great. Back in the days of vinyl, you've got the big gatefold, and we had an insert, and we put a lot of effort into the artwork and stuff. The front cover was done by the guy that does Motorhead's covers. I just wrote him a letter. I don't know where I got his address from. I was in touch with the guy from the Motorhead fan club in England. I probably got his name from there. He got his address. He was somewhere in Denmark or something, I think.
Wow.
So I fired him off a letter and said, we're an Aussie band. We need some artwork. What do you got? And completely out of the blue, I got a reply back saying, yeah, do you want to use this? So and all he asked was, I think he wanted a free copy of the album, was his payment.
Oh, I love it.
So it was an easy deal.
Yeah, definitely. Did you get, I mean, obviously, as you said, hindsight is one of those things, but at the time and even getting it out there, I mean, because I've been looking online and I can see it was sort of released, I think it was released through, is it Cleopatra? Cleopatra Records.
Yeah.
Did it get much overseas sort of interest, or did anything sort of get out overseas as far as because I can see that there's some copies floating around parts of Europe and things like that. Did you get any interest where people were sort of paying attention to what was going on with you guys, or even just with Australian metal?
No, not really. Sham was dealing with Cleopatra. He had the contact there, and he was dealing with them more than me. So he was probably more in like the day-to-day vibe of what's happening with them. But from my point of view, from my memory, we didn't get much feedback from Cleopatra at all. The deal we did with them is that we did all the production costs, or the recording costs, and they would press the album and distribute it. So distribution was left entirely to them. I mean, we didn't have anything to do with. They definitely sent it overseas. We knew they were putting it into Europe, but as far as I know, they never gave us any sales figures. They never arranged any media. They never did any promotion. I don't recall, getting asked to do any interviews or anything like that. So, I think it's that. I mean, I might be wrong. Perhaps Sham could fill that picture in a little better, and he might know more than me about some of those details. But my memory of the time then, around 80, 88, 87, 88, whenever it was that, again, we kind of handballed a lot of that over to Cleopatra, and as far as I know, they didn't do much at all. So the feedback we got in the end was not much. I have no idea how many even got sold. I know we pressed, the original pressing was, I think it was 500 copies. It might have been 1,000. I'm not sure. But out of that, I couldn't tell you how many were sold. It could have been 10. Could have been 900. I don't know.
Oh, it's such a
we never
familiar
got a
story.
royalty.
Oh, mate, it's so familiar. I mean, so many. Oh God. I mean, even these days, some of the labels that are still around. I mean, you continue to hear like these horrible stories of. Yeah, it gets out there, and then you just never hear from the label again, or they don't want to interact, or you just, there's no media, there's no promo, and oh God, I mean, yeah, it's just...
Yeah, I don't know what was happening with Cleopatra. I'm not saying they did bad. I mean, maybe they did a heap of stuff, and I just didn't see it. I mean, they could have been terrific. But from my point of view, the communication back to us was, well, back to me at least, it was almost non-existent. And so I really have no idea what happened with it. It went out, and that was pretty much it. And then, shortly after that, it was the whole Hobbs thing, and then Wooly and the rest of it. So things changed again with the band. So,
what was the sort of, I guess the thing that sort of brought the decision of stopping the band, sort of, because that was only about a year after the album came out. So I think that you guys had sort of marked that first chapter as closed. I mean, what was it? Just money, just typical band things that sort of put a stress on everybody?
Yeah, and look, that point after Wooly left, like I said, George had moved on to Taramis, and we carried on as a 4-piece for a little while. I think we were still a 4-piece when Wooly decided to pull the plug. I don't think, maybe we'd added Terry. I can't remember the timing exactly now. We might have added Terry just before Wooly left, or maybe it was after, but we were going through the lineup changes again and stuff like that, and then Wooly decided to move on. So we had to go find another guitarist, so we ended up with Terry and Richard. And look, they were great, good guys and great players, and I think we wrote some terrific songs with them as well. We started a period of songwriting. But then we headed into the studio. We played some gigs and stuff with them and stuff. We did a fair amount. There's some live videos out around. Then we headed back to the studio to record what we've been writing with them, because they're good, strong songs. And it just fell apart in the studio. Personalities, pressure, that kind of thing, and by then I think, for me and Sham, we'd been going for nearly, probably getting close to 9 years.
Yeah.
And it's not like we were sick of it, but, every time we seemed to be making some progress. Yeah. Every time we made some progress, it would go, something would happen. There'd be another pivot point and it'd fall backwards. So I think we're getting a little bit worn down by the 1 step forward, 2 steps back type thing, or 1 step forward, 1 step back maybe. It felt a little bit like going up and down on the spot. So I think that's just what, it just contributed to a general feeling of blur.
Yeah.
And it just kind of stopped. It's not that we really decided officially to put a line in the sand and call it quits. I think we might have called it quits for like a day, But I think we always sort of thought it was maybe a temporary pause. It's just that the pause just stretched out into decades. Yeah. So yeah.
Was it around that time that you guys were spending more time with Pete Hobbs and that whole sort of opportunity and I guess, for you guys to continue playing and just, being musicians? Was that sort of also that transitional moment where you were starting to do that already, or was that just as a result of Nothing Sacred just stopping or more or less stopping and then just going, okay, well, what else can we do now? And then making that decision to start playing with Pete?
Yeah, no, that was actually that's what led up to the Wooly departure. I mean, after that Sydney tour, again, I can't remember the exact timing. I don't know whether we're talking weeks or months or a year. I can't remember exactly. But Pete decided to put a pin in Tyrus and move on and do his own thing. So he wanted to do this Angel of Death project or recording or whatever. He'd written the songs, and some of them were Tyrus songs, I think, or proto-Tyrus bits that he'd taken and stuff. But for whatever reason, I'm not quite sure why. I can't remember the why, but because we'd always got on really well with Pete and everything. But he approached me and Sham and Wooly to do the backing tracks. He just said, I need to do a demo to get this off the ground, and I don't have a band at the moment. Would you guys just do the demo? So we literally, again, memory's a little hazy. I think we just rolled into a studio, set up for recording and stuff. He showed us what he wanted us to play. We just knocked it out, and we took a couple of days to record the 5 or 6 tracks, whatever it is. We ran over it a few times. We got it down pat. He showed it to us. We played it. We recorded it. That was it. So that was all we thought we were doing. We were just helping him out, just helping out a mate to record something. So at that point, that's all we thought it really was. So he took that. He went overseas. He got a lot of interest. He was always great at knowing what he wanted and how to go after it. He was very driven. So he pursued it. He got a contract, and then he came back and said, look, I'm going to go to Germany, Berlin or whatever, and record the album. Do you guys want to come? You did the demo. Do you want to come do the album? And then probably become, his band, in essence. I don't remember that we were talking about it in such clear terms, but that's probably where it would have gone. It would have been the next logical step, I guess. But initially he was putting at least come and record again. And for some strange reason now, Sham and I turned it down. I don't quite know what I know what we're thinking. We were in Nothing Sacred. That was our band. We were doing our own thing. We were writing our own songs, and Pete was offering us basically a gig almost as a hired gun, which is appealing in its own way, but it's not where we were at the time. Yeah. So I think we just felt, we'll stick with what we're doing. Thanks. Appreciate the offer, but but Wooly jumped at it. He was like, you're kidding me, Germany, I'm there. So, and he was going just to do the recording, but, we kind of knew where that would lead, and it did. Once he'd done the album, then they had to do the tour, and then they had to do the promo, and he was getting on really great with Pete and everything. So he decided, look, I'm just going to walk, which again is totally understandable. I've never had no angst about that. It was exactly where Wooly wanted to go as well. It was the style that Wooly loved, and Pete was playing the music Wooly wanted to play. They had a contract, they had a label support. It made perfect sense. So yeah, that was the point that led Wooly to leave. It was because of Pete's involvement. So yeah, that just left us having to replace guitarists again. So we thought we were going to carry on, but Terry and Richard didn't last all that long. We got another 12 or 18 months, I think, before it all fell apart.
God. So
yeah,
I mean, I got to know. I was lucky enough to get to know Pete sort of in later years. 10 odd years leading up to his unfortunate passing. But I was always surprised. Like when I first started to interact and meet him. His persona that he puts out there versus what he's actually like, and I was just always just constantly surprised by who he was as a person. But I'm fascinated to know, even just in sort of the times that you did spend with him, what was he like in the 80s? was it more or less the same as he's always been, and it's just that's just Pete all the way through, or was he a little bit more? I don't know. I like the feeling that maybe he was like this real wild, uncontrollable, like just lunatic back in the 80s, and then he just calmed down as he got older.
No, I got to disappoint you there, I'm afraid. No, he's. I've always said, as a simple phrase to describe Pete, he's the classic white line fever dude. You've never met a nicer, easier going guy. I remember Pete and I we were not like super close mates or something. We didn't hang out at each other's house every weekend or anything like that. But yeah, we knew each other, saw each other at gigs, and we did socialise occasionally. I remember going over to his place once, catching up with him and his wife and stuff, and or girlfriend, I think it was his wife, I can't remember. But anyway, they were just so normal. He was just such a quiet. He was so quiet, so. You know, he's the kind of guy that I'm making this up. This is not an exact story, but you know, if you walk into his house, he'd offer you a cup of tea and offer you a biscuit, and you know, it was very polite and very, very calm and whatever. And then the moment you got him into a band environment, like backstage, getting ready to go on, the guy was just an animal. He just this switch just clicked, and he went into some kind of ferocious Vlad the Impaler type mentality. He was just, you know, lay waste to the world and destroy all of mankind or something. You know, he totally had that switch that he could just flick on and off. Oh. You know, so his stage persona was utterly different to his offstage normality.
Yeah, I kind of like that. I like the idea that he's always just been like that, because I think the first time. Yeah, I would have seen him live before I actually got to interact with him, and I just remember just being utterly intimidated by what him on stage, and just like eyes rolling back of his head, and you know he's got all this sort of satanic stuff on stage, and I'm just going, oh my god, this guy just must be absolutely out of control. Like he just must be living this life of just utter chaos, and then I meet him, you know, a while later down the track, and he's an absolute gentleman. He's like the nicest guy, and my wife, who was probably my girlfriend at the time, I think I put on a gig for them up in Sydney, you know, many years ago now, and I remember him just saying hi to Jess and just talking to Jess, and he was just such a gentleman, and Jess just walked away and goes, I really like that guy. And I went, yeah, he's actually a really nice guy. Hey, like you wouldn't pick it. And he was always a rough looking guy, and the persona sort of locked in with that as well. And I guess it's that old saying, isn't it? You can't judge a book by its cover. It's just he was just one of those real pleasant surprises where it's just a really, really good guy. And when he did pass away, I mean, just that validation from so many people sharing stories about him and his character was just it was incredible.
Yeah, it's always been a little bit of a pity the way, you know, I lost complete touch with Pete after he moved on and started doing what he does. He was overseas and stuff, but even when he was back in Australia, we never really caught up again. And I saw him a couple of times. He showed up at a couple of gigs, or I'd turn on. We played in 2017 when we played the Metal for Melbourne 30th anniversary. And he played, and I saw him again. We talked for 3 minutes backstage or something, you know. But it was always a bit of a pity. I never really kept in touch with him. Which was a bit of a disappointment, really, because he was a really good guy. Yeah, and I've always had so much respect for what he did. You know, he really just one of those guys that just dragged himself up. You know, he just his force of will and his determination. You know, I mean, I know it takes more than that. You can't just want it and it'll happen. But he really felt like one of those people that just kind of made things happen through force of desire. You know, that always seemed to be how he worked. You know, he was a bit of a legend, really.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, even talking to him in later years, that you definitely got that drive from him, and just there's no compromises whatsoever, and just see him get frustrated with certain things that other people would just allow to happen and just live with it, and he would just be utterly frustrated and just push through, and like a bull through a china shop sort of mentality. But it was all coming from a place of, you know, we can do better. I can do better, and you know, or the situation can be better, and so let's just, you know, let's fucking fix it. You know, so you know, it's definitely a good approach with a lot of that stuff. So I think probably the most important thing, and I was leaving it to last, is is what you guys are doing now. And I know there's a big gap of time, and obviously, everybody's gone off and done a whole bunch of things, and as you said, it took a few decades to sort of come back around with Nothing Sacred. And I sort of was looking through the timeline where there was a couple of instances where you guys have got together to do a couple of shows here and there, but sort of then gone away again and then come back. But with this album that you guys have got, and it's coming out, I think is it mid-July? I think it's around that time.
July 16, I think.
July 16, release, yeah. And by the way, called No Gods, just for people listening. I keep forgetting that people are listening to this. I'm just having a chat. And so, I mean, I guess sort of getting closer to this release, and, it's been since 1988 when the last full-length album came out. I mean, what's going through your head now? I mean, is there something that you're really conscious of, or is it more of a case of we're just, try not to overthink it and just get an album out? I mean, where do you kind of sit on the whole thing?
Yeah, look, I for me, and I think it's the same for all of us. I mean, we've been around long enough now. We've done lots of stuff. I mean, we're very much just doing stuff we want to do. We don't have any pressure now. Not that I think we ever did feel. Like I said, in the 80s, I think we just did what we wanted to do, but we did it naively or blindly. Now we're probably a little smarter, but we're still motivated by this. Yeah, there is no feeling that we have to do this or we have to do that. We've got to do a certain thing a certain way because we have goals in mind that we have to achieve. I mean, it's more about just we probably started playing again, nearly a decade ago now, more seriously. I mean, we've always sort of kept in touch and we've always sort of talked about it. Actually, I take a slight detour just here to say that I know you interviewed Liam from Queensland in one of your podcasts from Malachite and stuff. He's kind of fairly pivotal in the story of what's happened to us because, at least from my point of view, this may not be true for the other band members, but I remember back in the MySpace days, so late 2000s, 2009, 2010 or something, I stumbled across somehow, I don't know, I can't remember what would have led to this. I stumbled across his MySpace page. And on his MySpace page, he had the lyrics for Death Wish as his thing. And I was just blown away by why anyone would have had the lyrics from one of our songs on their MySpace page. But more so because he was, I don't know, he was 18 or something at the time, or 17. I can't even remember how old he was. And I'm trying to figure out how he even knew that such a thing existed. So I actually reached out to him and said, hi. What's the story here? Is this just something you copied off your dad, or did your dad used to have this tattooed on his back or something, and you just always read it and wondered what it was or something, But he was totally into it. He had the EP and he loved it, and he was totally. And I think for me, it just gave me that sense that maybe enough time has passed that. Not so much that there's a new generation. I don't want to make it sound like I thought we had thousands of fans or something. I didn't think that by any means, but it gave me that sense that I think we'd always felt that the past was the past. But I think that was the first time when I suddenly thought maybe the past has value. Maybe something from the past can actually, you can bring that forward and it can actually be shaping a future. And I think it just made me think more seriously about where we were and what we'd been doing. So I think it made me a lot more open to the idea of playing again. So we started playing, and almost straight away we thought about recording. We should write some more, because the one thing I didn't want to be was a cover band of myself. Yeah. That I just play my greatest hits, of which we didn't have any, but my greatest could have been hits. I didn't want to be that kind of band, and that's all we did. So, but that's kind of what we were in 2012 or 2013. We were pretty much playing what we used to play, which is fun. But I thought, if I'm going to do this for more than just a moment of fun, if I'm going to take this any further, I need more. And, I think Sham felt the same way. And because we had new guitarists and stuff who hadn't really been involved in that, to them it really was like being in a cover band. So we wanted to write. So I think that was really all it was, that you don't want to just be a parody of yourself, a cheap cover of what you used to be. So to avoid that, you need something fresh. So we were motivated to write, and then we went through lineup changes. We've changed singer twice, we've changed guitarist once, and those issues have got a lot to do with just people being older, and it's just harder to get everyone thinking the same way and lining up your schedules and all that kind of stuff. It's just more complicated when people have got much more complicated lives. It's pretty easy when you're 19 and all you want to do is play. It doesn't take a lot to get that sorted.
No.
But the lineup changes, and then, like I said, COVID, the last 12 months, all of that has just conspired to take much longer than we thought it was going to. So the motivation was just to not be copies of ourselves. The outcome is no gods. Which we're really happy with. And, we did drag a couple of tracks from the old days forward because they were great songs.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you had some old stuff that you're going to sort of re-inject a bit of energy into, or some old riffs and arrangements and things like that.
Well, yeah, we actually... Sam ended up putting down something like about 17 or 18 drum tracks to get the thing started, and then we sort of mocked up some of those, did some sort of pre-production recordings and stuff to see, and then from that we started whittling it down, and about 6 or 7 of those were old songs. So we had been recording an album with the original guitarist Richard and Terry, or the late 80s guitarists Richard and Terry, but that album failed to get finished. So we've had those master tracks lying around for 20 years, and we didn't want to release those because, different band, different lineup, different era. Yeah. But still, some of the songs were good. So we had actually mocked out about 5 or 6 of those songs as well. And then we ended up picking 2. And that was both sort of because it sort of felt like it was connecting the old and the new in a nice way, but also just because I love the songs. They're really strong, well-written songs. So I was happy to be releasing them finally after so long because I thought they deserved to be heard. We went with that.
Such a relief. It must be such a relief to sort of, I don't know, I mean, maybe once release date actually rolls around and people are listening to it, it'll probably be a different feeling again. But I mean, just being so close to that and having it done, and so much time has passed as well. I mean, is there, this is definitely not the right word, but the first word that came to my head was closure, because you're not closing anything, but I guess maybe a bit of closure from the first year of the band in a way, and to have that link.
No, look, I know what you're saying. And from me personally, the whole story of Nothing Sacred it's not a bad story. It's not like I hate it or anything like that. It's actually quite a good story. I'm very happy I've done what I've done. But there was just so many moments where, you think these are those pivotal moments that when you watch that life story or that doco or whatever, this is where it all went right. When you're watching the story of Queen, it's the day that they hired Freddie Mercury or something, there's that pivotal moment that suddenly changed the direction. And it's always felt with Nothing Sacred, every one of those pivotal moments we somehow dropped the ball. they were always a pivot in the wrong direction. So it's not overly frustrating, but it's just been, it is what it is. It's just the way it panned out. We were scheduled to support Megadeth in 87 or 88, whenever the tour was, I can't remember. So we'd locked that in, and I remember going down to one of the local equipment places here in Melbourne. We hired a bunch of amps. We'd placed an order to hire like this whole back line of Marshalls so that when we rolled up at the gig, we were going to be able to unload our 22 Marshall amps or something and drag them on stage. So we had obvious ridiculous glory, visions of glory or something. So we were all booked, ready to do that, and then they cancelled. The tour just they can't. I've read since then it was during Mustaine's addiction days, so things were not real good. So Megadeth kind of fell off the rails a bit, but so they kind of it's only one tour. It wouldn't necessarily have been any major pivot, but then it might have been. It would have given us a far greater exposure than we currently had, and then suddenly it vanished. It was right in front of us, and then it suddenly disappeared. And there's been a whole sense of that over the years for me, that there were moments where we could have done this, might have done that, should have had this, and that didn't happen. Things just didn't go that way. Such is life. So, now it feels really good to be actually doing stuff that we like, and there's not a sense that this is a big breakthrough that suddenly we're going to achieve something we never did. But now I think we can sit back and be a lot happier with where we are and feel a lot more about it, a lot more positive about where we are. The album's it's terrific from where we stand. I mean, it's quite diverse. It's got a lot of different music in it that we want, and it makes the statement that we wanted to make. And so I think we feel in control of what we're doing at the moment. We feel like we know where this is going now, and maybe because there is no, if this just gets picked up, we'll tour with Megadeth and we'll play Varkin. Maybe because we're not thinking like that, it doesn't feel like you don't have that. I think back in the 80s, that's what you always hoped was going to happen.
Yeah.
You were just waiting to get that phone call that, Megadeth wants you to tour America with them. Now it doesn't, if I got a phone call like that, I'm not even sure I'd say yes. All right, I probably would. Okay, yes, I probably would say yes.
Yeah, just on record, just make sure everyone hears that.
That's right.
Karl will definitely say yes.
That's right. All right, I'm in.
Yeah, my arm's been twisted. It's great to, I've always said this, and this is probably one of the joys of doing this podcast for the past few years, is that I think with music these days, you tend to lose the storyline because music's just so, in some ways, it's very disposable. It's very quick. As soon as, every week there's new music coming out all the time, and it's either singles or their albums or whatever. But it's just a different listening experience and just a different way of approaching music these days. And I think because of that and the behavior that we all have around how we listen to music, we lose all the storylines, we lose the narrative, we lose the backstory, the legacy of a band, the good and the bad, the ugly, whatever. And so even just listening to you talk and sort of, reflect back and talking about some of these different moments along the way. For me now, I already knew this album was coming out in July, but to talk to you and listen to your story, there's so much more excitement around getting to that point in July where I get to listen to this album, because I'll be listening to it in context of where you guys have been and where you guys are now. And I think I'm going to find a lot more enjoyment as a result of that. So hopefully people listening to this as well will be on a similar wavelength and sort of really be able to connect with it, because they've been able to sort of listen to that story and understand what the path has looked like over the years.
Yeah, well, look, I hope so. I know what you mean. It's funny how, tying back to where you started this conversation in a way, where we started, that the way things have changed. Back when I was 18 or 17 and looking for music and trying to find things to listen to and whatever, it was so hard to get information. Even something as simple as the album cover. I remember when I bought the Ted Nugent Double Live Gonzo, I just spent hours looking at the album cover. There's no other information. You know nothing about Ted Nugent. No one, you can't Google him or anything. You can't see any. You can't realise that in fact he's a right-wing lunatic. You don't have any chance to worry about that kind of stuff or even know about it, because the channels of communication don't exist. So you buy this album, you go home, you put it on, and you're listening to the music, and it's so good, and you're loving it. And all you can do is look at the cover, and you just sit there and analyse the cover. You read the liner notes, you read the thank yous, you look at the photos, and that's all you had. So you had to really kind of embrace. It's kind of, although there's a vacuum of information, I don't really know anything about Ted Nugent, but you really kind of want to. You're really invested in trying to understand, or trying to just find something. You're trying to find any bit you can. There are only scraps, so any morsel feels incredibly tasty. Feels like a banquet. Even though it's only a tiny scrap. Nowadays, it's the opposite. You're so saturated on info that you just kind of, you get desensitized to it all. You just don't even pay attention. I get to the point now, I've bought albums that I love, I listen to, and I can't even tell you the name of the songs.
Yeah.
The fourth song, the really good, the slow one with the bit in the middle, that one. That's my favourite. And it's like, what's the name of the song? I said, I don't know. Can't remember. Because back in the old days, I sat there and just looked at the album cover, so the song titles were burnt into my brain.
Yeah.
Now they're just something flashing past on the iPod or something or whatever, or iTunes is just scrambling them and throwing them to me in a shuffle on a playlist. I don't even know the hell what song is this one again? What album is it off? I can't remember. I like it. it's really enjoyable. But so I think you're right. There's a sense that you kind of don't connect as heavily anymore. You consume, but you don't connect as well. I listen to a lot of new stuff and I love it. Plenty of great bands around at the moment that I really enjoy listening to and going to see them if we ever get the fucking chance again. But yeah, connecting, I don't understand the story behind anything nowadays. I don't even know, half the time you don't even know the members, can't even name them. And that used to not be the case. I can remember back in the early days, you were so starved for info that you just clung to every little thing you could get. You just grabbed hold and hung on real tight. So yeah, it's weird. And I'd be more than happy if people, when they listen to the album, they can relate to somehow that there's a fair amount of journey in this. It is a long journey. And even the story of the new guys in the band, James the singer and Stu the guitarist. I mean, Stu was around in the late 80s, early 90s in another Melbourne band called Captain Trips, and I used to go see them. I think we might have even played with them a couple of times. I can't quite remember. Sacred and Captain Trips, our lifespans didn't overlap much, but we might have played with them. But I've jammed with Stu a couple of times over the years and then fallen out of touch like you do. Captain Trips ended and Sacred on permanent vacation. And then we ran into him at the Scotty and Spoken Word about 4 years ago. Just ran into Stu in the audience and we hadn't seen each other for a decade and was with Sham. So we started talking and before we knew it, he was jamming with us. It's worked out really well. And his story alone, it's a different story to the Sacred story, but he is just so happy to be doing what he's doing at the moment. He just brings so much energy to what we're doing. So every member, every part of the story just really adds at the moment, and it just feels like it's a really good time. So, whether this goes anywhere or not isn't. Like I said, it's not important in a way because it's already what we want to do, and that's probably the most important thing for us. It feels good, and the lack of expectation means, I suppose it means a lack of disappointment. To be overly negative.
Well, it certainly takes the pressure off, and you can enjoy it for what it is, and ultimately, I mean, there's not a lot of bands or musicians who are able to sort of take a step away from the intensity of their 20s and trying to conquer the world and do all these sort of things, and then go off and live life, and then circle back around and try to do it all over again, and in a different way, of course, but. There's not too many bands that can do it, and musicians. So I think that alone, and then being able to sort of not just get together and jam every once in a while and just sort of relive some memories, but to actually follow through and create something new and get it done. Like, it's not half finished that takes 10 years to it's not a Chinese democracy sort of deal or anything like that. I mean, you got it out, and like it's coming out, it's done. And I think that in itself is such a huge achievement. So I think now it's just anything that comes out of it is just it's a bonus.
Yeah, well, thank you. And look, we've actually started writing already. We had a writing session about 2 weeks ago, just before we got locked down again. Thank you, government. But we had a writing session, and really the ideas are flowing. We did a rough sketch of where we think we're at, and like I said, there's a couple of tracks even one from the album that Sham and I are still keen we'd like to re-record, just because we don't think that song ever got the production credit that it deserves. So, when we went with that one, and there was an unreleased track from the early days that we never finished, we never recorded it. Actually, it's not true. We recorded it for the album, but left it off the album. I don't remember why. But that was it's a pearler of a song, and I'd love to do that. So we talked about that one as well. And then there's a couple of others we started working on. The guitarist just throwing ideas around. Sham's brought in a whole pile of ideas because Sham's actually more of a guitarist than a drummer a lot of the time nowadays. He spends a lot of time at rehearsals grabbing guitars and playing. So he's always throwing in his ideas and stuff. And we did a rough count. We've probably got about eight or nine songs at the moment that are, good and well underway. So we're sitting there thinking, we might actually, we'll see how we go, but we might try and start heading back into recording again, maybe in sort of September, October. Why not?
You might get into that one album a year sort of thing again. Like,
well,
geez,
yeah, I mean,
why not?
I honestly not quite sure why albums take so long, to be honest. I mean, maybe one a year might be pushing it. And sure enough, I've always had a theory that there aren't that many people who actually have a lot of good albums in them.
Yeah.
I mean, there's plenty of bands that have a classic album or two, and then it gets a bit wishy-washy after that. Yeah. Only the true fans can stick around. So I'm not sure that it's a good idea to try and flog out 10 or 15 albums. Might be pushing it a little. But, like I said, the one thing about Sacred, which is probably was not intentional and it certainly has its downside, is that we constantly had revolving members for one reason or another. So there's always fresh input.
Yeah.
So that's trying to find a positive out of a negative, but still, it's still true.
Well, it's exciting. It's exciting to see that there's still some tinkering around in the background and some discussions around continuing to put out new music, and even before this one sees the light of day as well. So that's it's exciting. It's cool. So the 16th of July, it's out. No Gods, and through, is it Rue Morgue? They're gonna put it out.
We've got a really, really convoluted business plan.
Ooh, okay, all right. It'll be out.
Rue Morgue's handling the Australian distribution.
Yep.
In Europe and America, it's being done through Rock Shots.
Oh, yep.
And in South America, it's been done through Tait, I think it is. I don't know how to pronounce that properly. Sorry, Ada, for mucking up your name. But he's the Brazilian label has done the Death Wish reissue box set.
Ah, right, okay.
Cham's been working on that as well. It's he found the old master tapes to the EP, and in the middle of finding the master tapes, he found alternate recordings, different guitar solos and stuff that we've completely forgotten about, that they were still there on the master tapes.
Wow.
So he's mixed them down and put them together. So now the EP is in the original version with a slight remaster. But then there's the alternate mixes where they've got different guitar solos and stuff. So he's put all that together, and then he's put together a bunch of stuff. Sham and I did a punk cassette recording back in the mid-'80s. One Christmas Eve, we were a little... Oh, well, I wasn't drunk, but Sham probably was. We just went into a studio and recorded 5 songs, just me and Sham.
Wow.
So Sham did drums and guitar, I did the bass, and then we both did vocals. Needless to say, the vocals are pretty awful. But we wrote it's probably the first ever punk recording, including a sitar. Sham actually put a sitar over one of the songs.
Wow!
So he's got a sitar in there as well. So it was a bit of an unusual Christmas, that one. But we put that together and we released that as a cassette many years ago, just for fun. And he's revamped that, found the tapes, cleaned them all up, and that's going to be in the box set as well. Plus some other stuff, some unreleased Sacred stuff, and some just rehearsals type stuff, and then some early stuff that Shan did even before I joined the band, when the band had a different name. Sham's dusted off some of that off as well, and then a live DVD from our trip to Japan in 2015. So that rounds out the box set. So that's all done through the Brazilian company, and they're also doing No Gods in South America.
Wow.
So
there's lots happening.
Yeah. So Rue Morgue locally is the go-to. John's been a big supporter of ours. We did a single with him last year just to get the ball rolling, released a 7-inch, and he's going to do the album, but only on CD at this stage. We might be doing vinyl. We're still trying to figure out how to do that in a COVID world and make it work.
Absolutely. Well, maybe to keep things simple, I'll have nothingsacred.com.au and then I'll put all the social media links, and once the album's out, I'll put some direct links depending where people are listening to this around the world. But mate, like, so good to connect with you, and like just blown away by the story. And as I said before, I think it just makes it even more exciting to get to that point in July to listen to the album and listen to it in context to what you've just been telling me, because it just makes this sort of stuff so much more enjoyable. And it reminds me just what you said before about, Nugent and albums where you didn't have a lot of information. I mean, I remember like just ripping apart liner notes and reading every name and trying to work out who that name was. Who are they? Why are they getting thanked in the thanks list, and finding out they're in another band. And so that's your next discovery, and you're finding those storylines. And so I think this is just a version of that I think that's why it sort of gets me a bit fired up and excited. So congrats, and looking forward to listening to it.
Thanks very much, Andy. I hope you and everyone else is going to enjoy it, because we really like it, and we're really hoping that that's going to be the vibe. So we'll see. If you don't like it, then you can all just piss off.
Yay! Now go to nothingsacred.com.au. Go and follow Nothing Sacred on the socials. Go and reach out to Karl on the socials as well. I'll have everything, including the Spotify and Apple Music links, in the show notes over at andysocial.net and andydowling.net, so everything will be there to check out. If you're listening to this after the 16th of July, then I'll have links in there to grab the new album, No Gods, that comes out on that date, funnily enough. In the meantime, I'll have the singles for Death Wish and Final Crime in the show notes as well. So go and check it all out. Reach out to Karl, let him know what you thought of the chat, and hopefully you dig a bit of Nothing Sacred. But as I said in the intro, what an amazing story. And if you're not even just slightly intrigued and excited about this album, now that you got the history, now that you've got the story and the adversity and the ups and the downs, and we're on the verge of hearing this new album, I'm really excited to listen to it in that context. And I'm gonna go old school. I'm gonna listen to it from start to finish. Well, we don't often do that anymore, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to sit down, I'm going to have a beer, and I'm going to listen from track one to track whatever the hell it's going to be, and just immerse myself and remember this story that Karl has shared on this podcast. So just fantastic stuff. And as I said before, reach out to Karl, follow Nothing Sacred on the socials, listen to the tunes, and I'll have everything in the show notes, of course. Now, before we wrap it up, of course, how many times can I say, of course, patreon.com/Andy Dowling. I say it all the time, it's the best way. It is the best way to support this podcast, and one of the goals for this year is to get as many $1 supporters as possible. The more that I can get on there, not only like from a financial point of view, it's great because it takes some of the pressures off running a podcast. There's a lot of costs that come into play. I was going to say come involved. I don't know if that's English, but let's run with that. Such as production, hosting. So I've got to do podcast hosting, website hosting. I've got the editing. I've got gear. I have some other stuff that I can't think of off the top of my head, but a bunch of things that, it's just costs that add up throughout the year. And the Patreon community helped take a little bit of that pressure off so I can focus on having these great chats with people like Karl on this episode. So a massive thank you for all these people that have been joining. $1 is the entry point. $1 a month, virtually nothing. If I get heaps of you guys, it's going to be amazing. And actually what I was trying to say before is, of course, financially it's fantastic, but I think the most important thing is just having that accountability and the validation from you guys that are just backing me and the podcast. It's the ultimate motivational juice that I need to just keep firing away at this podcast and getting more and more amazing people on the show over the coming weeks and months and hopefully years. So Patreon is just making all that stuff happen. Now, a massive thank you to my top tier supporters. These guys are the heavy hitters, the heavy contributors. These people are just absolutely amazing. I just really appreciate their support. They're part of the wider community of just amazing people who are supporting me on my little Patreon and podcasting journey. But in particular, thank you to these people. Andrew from Perth, Mick G from Sydney, Ash from Deniliquin, Den from Dapto, Rod from Rayleigh in North Carolina, Patrick from Canberra, Liam from Brisbane, Chris from Sydney, Brenda from Leeton, Tim from Canberra, James from Brisbane, Steve from the Gold Coast, Andrew from Sydney, and Talitha from Brisbane, if I get Talitha's name correct. Thank you so much, folks. Really appreciate it. And as I said before, part of the wider community over at Patreon who are backing your mate Andy with his little old podcast. So that's it. Another podcast done in the bag. Next episode, well, it's episode 300. And we're just rolling. We're smashing it. We've got heaps of guests. I've got heaps of guests lined up. People recorded, and we're just throwing them out there. We're just rolling. We're not going to have any big fanfare. No celebrations. You can send me a cake if you want in the post, although it might not get here in one piece. But nonetheless, we'll have a little woohoo, and then we'll keep firing away. But episode 300 is coming next. It's another musician, an Australian musician, somebody who's been on the podcast previously, an absolute legend, a great chat, and I look forward to sharing that with you very, very soon. So until then, take care and ta-ta.